Hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. So, all of this new expansion leak stuff has got me thinking about what I'd actually like from a new expansion. So, what kind of systems and content would be good for the health of the game, and how could Blizzard actually implement them? Now, as crazy as all of this might seem talking about it now, we're actually probably not too far away from an expansion announcement. 7.3 is pretty much bringing the end of the overall Legion arc, and do remember that Legion was announced a mere 2 months after Warlords of Draenor's final patch released, so we're probably a few months off, but it's pretty close. Okay, let's get right into it. So, more zones. Legion had 4 zones, and then Suramar at the end game, and that really just for me was not enough to make the Broken Isles feel like this large, believable place. Now, looking all the way back in time to Outland, we had 7 zones, and they were really big as well. Then Northrend had 8, plus Wintergrasp and Crystal Song, even though Crystal Song had barely anything in it, sadly. We've slowly regressed since then. MoP had 7 zones at launch, Warlords had 7, though 2 of them were faction exclusive, and then Legion only had 5. And then the likes of, say, Val Shara were very short, plus much of the terrain in the Broken Isles isn't really playable. It's mountains and coves and stuff like that. You don't actually go there. Now, this has made the Broken Isles feel quite small, and I don't think that lends itself well to an RPG. So, in the next expansion, I would like to see more zones than what we got in Legion. Ideally 6 or 7 leveling zones, balanced with the idea of you needing to, do about 4 of them to cap a character. This would allow Blizzard to explore more biomes, include more stories, and in general just build out a more compelling chunk of the world for players to explore, and for the expansion to take place in, because with level scaling and what they do at the endgame now, all of those larger zones and more zones, they would be viable endgame locations. So directly following on from that, let's talk about the story. I think Legion actually had a bit of a weak story, especially during the leveling. Why is that? Well, we were sent to collect 4 MacGuffins, kind of in isolation. This meant that we did not have character arcs which spanned our journey on the Broken Isles, and generally, it was sort of rather disconnected as an experience. So, while there were individual really good elements, it didn't build up to a cohesive whole that strongly, and this, in fairness, is mostly because they designed it so that the zones could be done with in any order, with the level scaling, which was definitely an admirable thing to do. Now, when we think back to, say, Wrath of the Lich King, it actually has a lot of zones that would play in any order just fine. Now, I do happen to think that Wrath worked really well in some ways. Why? Well, almost every zone felt like its own place, and here's the difference from Legion. All of those zones, they felt like their own place, but they had a Scourge element. So as we explored, the looming threat of the Lich King was sort of developed more and more. This really made a strong unifying theme that built up to Icecrown, I think, very well indeed. I didn't feel that as much with Legion. So I thought to myself, well, what would Wrath look like in today's system? Because that would be pretty damn awesome, wouldn't it? Especially with the modern quest design and cinematics that they've got. So if Wrath were done today, probably Icecrown and Storm Peaks would be max level only zones like Suramar. Then the rest of the Wrath zones would work really in any order just fine when you think about it. So really, it would be good as long as we had some sort of strong introduction to the continent. Awesome, great, but what would I want a new expansion to look like? Basically, what I described plus characters, and that would be pretty easy to do. You'd have your initial cast of characters be together at the opening of the expansion, then you would have them be scattered across the leveling zones before coming together for the endgame Suramar-style zones, or zone, whatever. Then you just ensure that there's a strong thematic tie between the zones, and basically this would unify character-based storytelling with the overall world building, and should make for this really cool, interconnected, cohesive experience that still gives us a really great finale to the story once we cap out our characters. Next, dungeons and raids, and to be honest, I love Legion's dungeon content, so I'd be happy with them pretty much keeping that going as it has been, maybe with a few alterations so that it fits the new expansion systems, and the same goes for the raid content. There are, I think, solid points to the idea of there being too many difficulties and progression feeling too fleeting, but I do suspect that Blizzard will stay the course in that regard. That said, I'm not super hardcore into raiding currently, so let me know what you would like to see if you're a hardcore raider. So, artifact weapons. Well, we know our artifacts are going to be retired after Legion. How? Well, I have no idea, but it's going to be interesting to see how Blizzard handle it systemically. My suspicion is that all this business with Magni Bronzebeard and Azeroth is going to lead to us forging our own weapons, and that we'll sort of get something similar to artifacts, but with more customization and tweaks to the overall design based on what Blizzard have learned throughout Legion. Alternatively, we could just go back to having normal weapons that don't have traits or anything fancy like that, which would free up a lot of class design space, perhaps allowing for a different form of endgame progression, something like maybe the old Path of the Titan system that they planned for Cataclysm but then had to cut. Next, I'd like to see something new, and this might seem like a generic thing to have on the list, but I think you know what I mean, kind of like a new title feature, not just a update to an existing category of content. Now 7.3 has Invasion Rifts, which are Invasion points, which in the game files are called Rifts, which maybe points to some sort of Diablo 3 parallel. Maybe we could see something like a D3 Rift in the new expansion as a new feature, though what I would really like to see all that innovation go towards is the next point in this list, and that is dynamic world content. World quests are a good enough evolution of dailies for World of Warcraft, but the wider industry does have more interesting ideas. For a follow-up to world quests, I would like to see something far more dynamic and player-driven. I don't want things to spawn on a fixed timer. I want stuff to happen because groups of players have went into the world and made them happen. You know, as if it's an actual living, breathing world. So, you know, as an example, a bunch of players finish an event in a location which causes another event to spawn based on that. You'd be encouraging large groups of roaming players working together, perhaps, you know, evoking the vibe of the Legion pre-expansion events. In general, though, just more dynamic world content and less static world content. Okay, next, I'd like to see them make use of the old world. Blizzard said that the level scaling in Legion was pretty much a test, and that they'd look at doing more if players enjoyed it. Well, I'd like to see where this could lead us in a future expansion. One way to actually make use of it, which would be really cool, is the old world. But then the question is how? Like, do you do a Diablo 3 adventure mode like bounty system that's similar to our current world quests? Do you reuse existing quests, or, you know, just instead sort of use the older locations of the game as a place to put new content? For an example, if you're doing an Old God expansion, you could have sort of like cultist pop-up shops appear in zones, and that could be an event that people would go to in the old world. Perhaps we're doing, you know, an expansion that's really Alliance versus Horde focused, and Blizzard could perhaps have us working for the Alliance and the Horde in the traditional continents, and use that continent-wide scaling to basically make that happen and make it work. I'd just like to see what kind of ideas they've got cooking up for content like that. Okay, legendaries. I don't want them. They're a strange thing. I actually don't like the legendary system at all, but I really do like the legendary effects. I think they are really, really damn cool. I love how they change up how you're playing the game. They allow you to create new strategies with your class, or at the very least, they sort of let you tailor yourself to the situation at hand. I would love to see Blizzard continue to offer that level of gameplay customization to players, but just not with the current legendary system. Now, perhaps you could do it simply and just have it be there's legendary gems with an equip limit, and you know, you get access to those gems far quicker than the legendary gear. I think that would be a pretty good way to offer customization, but also not have item level bloat, and perhaps make it so that the legendary gear isn't really competing with regular gear. Now, you see, for me, getting legendaries isn't exciting, but what is exciting is the new gameplay opportunities that are opened up by them. So I'd love to see Blizzard double down on the gameplay aspect and work in the acquisition aspect to make it really less of a barrier to the fun gameplay which they undoubtedly have created. Next, Titan Foraging. Oh, it's been talked about a lot. A lot of high-end players are very frustrated by it, especially in Mythic raiding, but also a lot of casual players really do appreciate its effects and what they can get out of more accessible content. So I would like to see Blizzard unify Titan Foraging with something like the Obliterum Forge, and sort of mop-style item upgrades, and basically allow us to have better control. So, you could get really lucky and maybe have 5 levels of Titan Foraging on a bit of gear, but you could also just melt down some dungeon and raid gear and manually upgrade, you know, a piece of gear that you do want. And that would make it so that all gear matters, and it would also make it so that Titan Foraging feels like a bonus rather than a limitation, because all gear could be upgraded. It's just someone happened to get a few upgrades for free because of Titan Foraging, but everyone can still work towards that same goal. Now, in fairness, to get this to work, you'd probably need to rein in the Titan Foraging a little bit, maybe, you know, have it only be a max of 20 or 30 item levels past a bit of gear's base, but overall, I think that would be plenty. I don't think Blizzard will remove Titan Foraging, but for me, something like this seems like a good middle ground. Next, let's talk about PvP and begin with Battlegrounds. Where are they? There hasn't been one since 2013. Guys, please, come on. Now look, I love what they've been doing with Brawls, but something fresh to the default roster would be great. The next expansion would be the first that they introduced post the Brawl system of 7.2 being introduced, so perhaps we could see some of the elements they've learned from the Brawl seep into the main game. I'd also love to see playlists so we could queue based on game type, so you could queue for a capture and hold, you could queue for a capture the flag. I think that would be pretty great. Another PvP thing that I would like is solo queue for rated arena with decent, robust matchmaking. I think it could work out just fine and make that be content a lot more people could engage in. Look at Overwatch. Its competitive works with solo queue and going in with a full stack. Blizzard can do it for WoW. I also think that they might need to have another look at PvP rewards. It seems like that isn't really working out great for people at the minute. And personally, I like how gear doesn't influence PvP that much, but it seems like I might actually be in the minority with that opinion, so maybe they do need to just have another shot at PvP gearing. But yeah, that's really most of what I want to see from PvP. Basically, some new content, please. Another thing I'd love from a new expansion is more opportunities for solo challenge. I absolutely love some of the more tightly designed solo stuff in the game. Things like the Leishan Treasure Trove, the 7.2 class challenges, the Withered scenario, and then most recently, the Chromie scenario, which I really love. It's one of my favorite things in Legion. I think it's really well designed. So seeing more of that exist in a future expansion would be fantastic. I think times where WoW allows for self-improvement that is akin to trying to beat a hard level in a traditional game, I think that's really welcome as a side activity to do. It should never be the main thing in WoW, it is a group game, but some of it would be nice. Next, new races or sub-races. So, okay, for a long time, we've had one expansion add a new race, and then the next one add a new class. This sort of stopped with Warlords because they took the time, rightly so I think, to revamp the character models, and then in Legion they added a new class with a Demon Hunter that basically required a lot of unique model work, and then they revamped most of the game's animations. So, now that's all done, it's probably about time that we got a new race or races. That said, it's hard to know what, really. I've seen many requests for playable Naga. At one point I know playable Ogres were planned but scrapped, but neither of them really seem that feasible when you think about the literal implementation. The Pandaren kind of came out of left field, but still I think Blizzard would have to be quite creative if they wanted to introduce a new race into the game at the minute. One thing that they could do alternatively, though, is focus on the customization for the current races that are available. So, more faces, more hairstyles. But one thing that I would really love is sub-races. Many of the game's races have a few different groups within them, kind of like different, I don't know, ethnicities or whatever. So, you've got the various dwarf clans, you've got the High Mountain Tauren and the Tonka, you've got the different types of trolls, and then even in places where there are not, different ethnicities or whatever, you could also go down cultural lines, offering tattoos, jewelry, maybe the odd unique transmog item that, fits people from a specific part of the world, something cool like that. Essentially, I just like a bit of a look and feel and character customization overhaul. Now, that said, I don't think this is super important. It's not actually gameplay, but it would be a pretty nice bit of flavor. So overall, there's a broad look at what I'd want to see from an expansion in a more generic fashion. I'll talk about this sort of thing more when we actually know specifics about whatever the next expansion is going to be, but this video is really more a reflection of the lessons learned in Legion and how some of those things could be applied to the future. Of course, what's most important is what you guys think, so let me know down in the comments. But other than that, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.